Welcome to the UN Brief. Today we interview Michael Moller. He is the chair of GESDA's Diplomacy Forum. Thank you for watching and listening to the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe. Spent 40 plus years at the United Nations. You started as a legal officer at the United Nations Agency for Refugees, and then you worked your way up and worked also with Kofi Annan, the former Secretary-General, late Kofi Annan. And I would love to know a bit, what was your experience working with him? You mentioned once that he was your mentor in some ways, and that you would never have survived at the United Nations if it wasn't for your close relationship with him. So I'm very intrigued about the issues of leadership and how can people develop a career in a multilateral organization of the political complexities such as the United Nations. So tell us a little bit about working with Kofi Annan as your mentor and him as a person as well.
I'm sure I would have survived one way or the other without him. What I did say is that I'm quite convinced that I would never have made it as far as I did in the system without him as a mentor, but also as an example. Working with him, even before I worked for him directly, we were friends and colleagues, and I learned a tremendous amount from him along the years. And what I also told you was that I never, in his capacity as a mentor, if you want, I always asked his advice before accepting a job as I moved up the ladder, and he was also always very generous with his advice. But working with him was working with an extraordinary human being. As I said, I learned lots of things from him, not just about leadership, but also about how to manage people, how to interact with people, how to think of the important issues that one needed to pay attention to, maybe more than others, which he was also very good at. He was somebody with an extraordinarily correct and targeted political nose, and he understood how the system works. He himself came up through the ranks, was the first Secretary-General who came up through the ranks. So he was, in all respects, a fascinating and really quite extraordinary human being, with great amount of empathy, with great amount of human warmth, and a role model, in other words.
They say that he was one of the first Secretary Generals that also paid attention to the news media and made sure that, communication was clear to the correspondents at the United Nations headquarters, that he was always making himself available to the news media. Tell us a little bit about that, this vision that he had, how important it was to be to support the news media in covering the United Nations.
Well, it was support, but it was also to ensure that the message, the right message, would go out as far as possible and as widely as possible. Governments, the United Nations also has to take care of its constituency and to make sure that those that it is trying to help understand what it is we're doing, where we're doing it, and how we're doing it. Very often, for example, when the UN was deployed into a place where there was peacekeepers and where there was strife and there was peace to keep or a war to stop, it was incredibly important to make the population understand why we were there and what we were going to do for them in their daily lives. And clearly, one medium to make sure that this message would be passed is to ensure that you have the media with you and that they understand what you're doing. So he spent a lot of time on that. That is correct. He made sure that the quality of people that were in charge of the communications and the media aspects of the work of the UN were the best. And I think that to a large extent, the fact that the perception of him globally and his reputation was not just because he was a great man, but also because the message was a good one and was consistently spread out to where it needed to go.
He told me also that his desk was always clean, that he didn't have much paper on it, because it's somewhat, and I remember thinking of that quite a bit, saying, oh, indeed, you know, because as journalists, we tend to accumulate lots of little bits of stories and material that we will look into it afterwards or during writing a story, while writing a story. And then I talk about, and then I said, he must be really focusing on the present, right? When he's dealing with someone, he's really fully putting his attention to this person instead of just thinking of all the, you know, tidbits of information that he has. I don't know. What was the idea behind it, you know?
Well, first of all, he was disciplined. He was a disciplined person. Second of all, in terms of the paper on his desk, he also had a number of people working for him, as you can imagine. Who he was very good at delegating it, and he made sure that those around him, and he expected from them the excellence necessary to carry out the task that he was dealing with. But the second thing you said is very true. When he was talking to somebody, he was fully focused on that person. He was one of the best listeners I knew, and that is one of the things I learned from him very much so, that you had to listen to people, and you had to listen carefully, and not only that, but you had to also incorporate their point of view into your thinking and into your consideration of whatever problem you're dealing with before taking a decision on how to move forward. And that was also part of his trademark, if you want. He also had this trick. I don't know if it was a trick or it was just a natural thing that came to him. When he spoke very lowly. You know, you really had to pay attention to make sure that you caught everything he said. And I think it was a bit of a trick to make sure that you actually did pay attention to what he has to say. So it worked.
Yes, I remember that, going downstairs and the news media was surrounding him just as he entered the building, right? When there was some major issue around, for instance, the invasion of Iraq. And he would be very calm and spoke in a very soft tone. And then everybody was like, you know, the cameras and the microphones trying to get closer. But again, I thought that this was something that was also, again, you know, these were very tense times at the United Nations. Public opinion was against it. Public opinion sometimes did not understand exactly what is the role of the United Nations in peace and security in certain situations. So, but he made sure, you know, there was a calming tone too, that he was dealing with the problem at hand the best way possible. And nowadays, you are working with GESDA, this new organization based in Geneva that brings together the diplomatic corps and the technologists. Tell us a little bit about this new role.
Well, GESDA stands for the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. It's a foundation that was created by the Swiss government together with the Geneva government, with the objective of first of all, on the background of understanding that science and technology is coming at us with incredible speed, is going to have massive impact on our lives over the next not very many years and beyond, and that we were not particularly prepared. And when I say we, meaning globally, we're not particularly prepared for the impact that these technologies are going to have on us. So that it was important, first of all, to understand what is coming. To analyze it, to identify those scientific breakthroughs that may be coming over the next 5, 10, 25 years, which is the framework in which we work, and to see which ones of these would be the most appropriate to eventually turn into tools that could be beneficial for those whose job it is to make life better for humanity. And in order to do that, what we do once we have identified some of these things, and we really go out to laboratories and universities, is to ask the scientists who are working on these issues and to sit down with what I call the potential end users, what we call within GESDA the diplomacy actors, just to have sort of a category that is opposite to the scientific actors, and for them, and ask them to sit down and talk and agree between them on which ones of these things that are coming at us are the most appropriate to turn into tools for the use of those who are tasked with making life better for our brothers and sisters around the world. And in doing so, also to help ensure that the ethical, the governance, and the equity aspects of these new technologies, many of which are being invented and developed in the private sector, without much adult supervision, without any rules, and very little concern for ethics and for equity. And we need to do that in order to make sure that the world that these technologies are going to help create is going to be the world we want to live in, and that we stay, to the extent possible, in charge of our future. And again, we meaning humanity. And we're not very far from the opposite, where technology is so intrusive in our lives, and increasingly so, where we may be at the risk of losing a bit control over how things are going to develop. A scary thought, but something that needs to be addressed. And in doing so, also putting these two communities together that never really talk to each other, really, is also a way for us of leveraging the fact that the scientific communities, more than any other, have been able to and continues to be able to collaborate across geographical and political divides, and use that fact, leverage that fact into the way that we are structuring our work processes, to maybe come up with a proof of concept of a new kind of multilateralism, one that is much more effective, more collaborative, more integrated, less siloed, more preventive, and more networked. So it's ambitious, what we're up to. We are now just past the end of our startup phase. We have been established as a full-fledged foundation. The Swiss government has announced that we now have a 10-year lease of life. They have also increased substantially the financial contribution by the country. We are not taking money from other governments for the time being, and we're not taking money from major corporations. It's only private money that we accept on top of what the Swiss are giving us, so that we retain the required neutrality, if you want, and objectivity, and lack of a push from others, outsiders, to do our job properly. And we just had our second summit with quite a large participation, over 1,400 people, which was quite successful, where we also brought forward some of the outlines of some of the solutions that we're coming up with, that are coming out of these conversations, particularly on quantum. We are proposing the creation of what we call an open quantum institute, which would be a platform.
Tell me more, because I found that very fascinating. And many of the participants, the minister, the foreign minister of Singapore, and so many others, high-level officials that were participating, were talking about the importance of this collaboration.
Yes. And this comes back to what I was talking about in terms of equity. This is a platform in which we're going to do two things. One is to convince those who have access to the hardware, to quantum computers, which are very expensive still for the time being and hard to operate, to allow scientists from places and from countries and from communities that don't have the wherewithal to actually get themselves one of those, to get access to it, so they can be part of the creation of the science around quantum, and be part of the creation of software for the use of these computers down the road, and be part of the discussion of how we are going to make sure that quantum in its many forms is going to be used for the benefit of humankind. Quantum, together with artificial intelligence, is going to have dramatic impacts on our lives. And when I say dramatic, it's with capital letters. And most of us are not really aware of that. And most of us are not ready to adapt fast enough to the speed with which these technologies are coming to us. So that's also part of what we would like to help with, and that we are looking at in our conversations also with governments and with international organizations, with NGOs, with other academic institutions, etc. It's as I said before, it's an ambitious project, but it's an incredibly exciting one, and one that is very needed. If I may just give you and your listeners and viewers our website, which is GESDA, GESDA.global. And in there you will, amongst other things, quite apart from the description of how we do what we do and where we do it, also find a document that is called the Science Breakthrough Radar, which is a really interesting document written by quite a lot of scientists. The latest iteration has been written by over 700 scientists around the world and signed off by them, that describes what is likely to happen over the next 5, 10 to 25 years in the areas of quantum, of artificial intelligence, of human augmentation, of geoengineering, and of science and diplomacy. It's well worth looking at.
Tell us a little bit more about your role with the GESDA. So, because we say diplomacy, right, has always been working with technologies, right? Like every mission, the permanent mission of Brazil, the permanent mission of Portugal, they all have someone who would be specifically working on the area of technology, emerging in new technologies within the mission. But so tell us a little bit.
That's quite a new element, actually, in many of the missions. There are more and more countries understanding the need to be on top of what is happening in technology and what is coming. And that's one of the things that we provide them. We can give them much more sort of privileged access, if you want, to these considerations.
I see. So, and then your role will be really the contact with all the.
Yes, I'm chairman of the Diplomacy Forum, and there's a scientific forum as well. And my job, together with my colleagues, is the outreach, is to go and talk to those who are going eventually to benefit from the use of these technologies. So I've spoken to pretty much every single head of every single UN organization, and not a single one of them has said that they don't want to work with us, or to be informed by us, etc. They understand the value of what we have to offer. We are outreach to governments. We are briefing governments right, left, and center. We are now stepping that up. We are going to be talking to NGOs around the world who are also part of those who implement projects that benefit humans. We're interacting with the business community, who will have a role to play in the development of these technologies, whether they are technologies or new institutions or new treaties or whatever it is, the different solutions that we're coming up with can be. So that's what we do. You have the scientists on one hand, and sort of I help bring in the non-scientists. And the interesting aspect of that, just to give you an understanding, when we start a conversation about a specific issue or specific science or specific new technology that is coming, we create a task force that goes deeper into the evaluation of these things. And these are populated by scientists, by non-scientists, and they are chaired by a scientist and a non-scientist. Which is important to make sure that the conversation is as rich as possible. But we go further than that. So when that conversation has matured and we're beginning to see outlines of a solution in whatever field we're looking at, we then broaden that conversation. We put it in through something we call the situation room process, where we bring in ethicists, we bring philosophers, we bring artists, we bring in young people, old people, other academics. We are very keen to make sure that the diversity is taken care of, both geographical, substantial, and gender. We are very keen to make sure that as broad a part of the population is able to take part in the conversations in order to create the trust in what we're doing. Trust in science these last few years is at a very low place. That has to be recreated, because we are convinced, as are many people, that we're not going to make it unless we bring science back to the decision-making tables and to the policy-setting tables. We are now in the process of finalizing a platform where people can go in online and ask questions and make comments and sort of interact. It's a very interactive. And by the way, the radar, the breakthrough radar online is also very interactive. You can go in and ask questions and leave comments and be part of the conversation. So for us, that's primordial. We have to have as broad a population as possible. We've just started recently a youth part of GESDA. We started that in South Africa. A lot of young people become increasingly part of the conversation. You may have seen during the summit quite a few young people participating, and some of them are those who participated in the first meetings online of that youth cohort, if you want, of GESDA. So we are also making sure that the human rights aspects of what we're doing and what these technologies is taken care of. The right to science and the right to access to science is a dormant human right, if you want. It exists and it's codified in the human rights documents, but we need to bring it up to the surface. So we are helping to do that by having conversations with lawyers and with other interested people. We have created a curriculum bilingual curriculum, bilingual in the sense that science language and diplomacy language, and teaching to each other so that they understand each other better when they do sit down to talk. And that's very popular and will be increasingly so. We just started a couple of months ago. And we are creating partnerships with academic institutions, universities, both here and abroad, to make sure that young people that we can help with the science education, that we can help with access to our youth, which is absolutely primordial. They're the ones who are going to inherit the mess we have left, and they need to be science savvy and technology savvy in order to manage in the right way the impact of that technology in our lives, both now and in our future.
Yes, I was really impressed by the depth and the width of the areas you were covering, right? There was solar energy, there was climate change technologies to address climate change head on. There was telehealth and a number of technologies, emerging technologies or new technologies that are really making impact already in society, and you are bringing to the table again the diplomats, the policymakers, the ethical areas that will be looking into how these technologies can really serve humanity.
You're right, but I haven't said that, but I will say it now, that the very basis for what we do are the SDGs. The implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals is very much at the heart of how we decide on which technologies we're going to look at, to make sure that all these technologies are used for the benefit of people worldwide, and using the SDGs as a framework makes life a lot easier for everybody.
Indeed, yes. Well, thank you very much, Michael. Really a pleasure to speak with you. There's so much I want to ask more, but we try to keep to 10 minutes our interviews. Thank you for watching and listening to the UN Brief. And don't forget to subscribe,